Our three panelists from, I guess, left to right are Emma Restrepo, Jess King, and Nina Sachdev. Emma is the founder of Dos Puntos, which is a wonderful multimedia, hyper-local news organization that I'll ask her to describe in a moment. They were the winner of, in a very competitive process, a $100,000 grant from something called Press Forward, which is a national consortium of funders. They were one of 4 or 5 in all of Pennsylvania, and we're going to ask her what went well about that and how you plan to invest the money. Jess King is a funder. She's a former government official in Lancaster, and she is the executive director of something called the Steinman Institute. The Steinman Institute came from the Steinman Foundation. The Steinman family was until quite recently the owner of the local Lancaster newspaper, which they donated to a public television and radio organization, WHYY, in Harrisburg, which is unusual, novel, and we want to talk about that. Nina is the Director of Communications as her title. Her role is much broader than that, including research and much of Media Impact Funders' external relations. And Media Impact Funders is based here in Philadelphia on Washington Square, but they work nationally, and it's a membership organization of 150, is about right? 150 funders of media including documentary, radio, media writ large. So she's going to help us zoom back a bit and talk about the funding environment and kind of go into the heads of funders. What are they really looking to do? Do they care about media, or do they care about education or green space or arts and culture? How do we unlock their funds and their interests? Briefly, Lenfest Institute. Lenfest Institute was founded by a cable pioneer based here in Philadelphia, Jerry Lenfest. He was successful in business of humble origins, but successful. He exited his business to Comcast and dedicated himself to philanthropy. That meant the Philadelphia Art Museum, the Curtis Institute, healthcare, childhood literacy, a whole array of things. And at the tender age of 85, he felt that local journalism was in deep trouble in his city and elsewhere. He bought the Philadelphia Inquirer, and which is not unusual for a wealthy local investor to buy the hometown newspaper. What was novel was that he then dedicated it to public service and donated it to a nonprofit. So the Lenfest Institute is the nonprofit owner of the Philadelphia Inquirer. We concluded, with Jerry's urging, pretty quickly that the Inquirer was an important mainstay of Philadelphia journalism and information, but that we were a part of a much broader ecosystem. So our commitment has been to support journalism across Philadelphia for all communities. That very much includes WHYY, but Word Radio, the Philadelphia Tribune, Impacto, Algia, and others. And we've, as Bill Marazzo was saying, embraced partnership. We try very hard to get people to work together and help fund some of that connective tissue. I want to introduce 2 people who are here. Feather Houston, who is a key part of our governance, and Sean Mooring, if he's here. There he is. Sean has his own table. That's pretty prestigious. Sean runs the Philadelphia programs for the Lenfest Institute and is really the architect of our work, most particularly Every Voice, Every Vote, which is a collaboration of a couple of dozen media organizations across the whole city of Philadelphia and another 50 community organizations. So Sean is the connective tissue in our effort to build partnership. So let's start with Emma Restrepo and tell us about Dos Puntos. What does the name mean, and how does your newsroom work? And I'll get into Press Forward in a minute, but
Yeah.
Tell us about you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim, and WHYY. Dos puntos means 2 points, and we have the dots. Because it's also in Spanish, dos puntos is column. So Jim is saying column.
But
blah,
2
blah,
points
blah,
of
blah.
view as well, right?
But it's also two point of view. So we have those 2 meanings. So I think both apply to the work that we do in the platform. It's a hyperlocal media covering some issues, urgent issues from the Latino community in Philadelphia. I wouldn't say the whole Latino community, but at least some parts, especially North and South Philly. Yesenia knows that. We are a very diverse, not only in the way that we produce content, but also we are a very diverse team. So yeah, that is dos puntos.
And we experience your content and your work and your brand in podcasts, social media, and how do you show up? Where can I find you?
Yeah, we have a strong social media, and that means we put a lot of like quality work, and we try to do it very beautiful in a beautiful way, appealing. Dos puntos platform. We have the podcast. The platform is kind of the umbrella of everything. So it is a podcast. We produce a lot of information in social media because Johnny was saying before, social media is the way that the immigrant community consume information. They don't have time to read articles. And we also create a community newsroom made of 4 women from the Latino community, and one is the owner of Tierra Colombiana. The other one is the CEO of the cosmetologists in Pennsylvania. Another one is a community social worker, kind of a social worker, and also a therapist. So we have an incredible way to spread information through this group of women. We didn't realize that in the beginning when we started the group, but through food, through beauty, through many paths we can distribute information, and we collaborate with other media, Metro Philadelphia, Chatbit, and with thanks to the PJC, for instance, we have the opportunity with Every Voice, Every Vote to create content in a different way, more service journalism to help moms to navigate the education system. And with Press Forward, we have the opportunity to produce more journalism content, articles, if I can say that. So as you see, it's a very diverse, and that's why we call it a platform, really.
So you have leapfrogged what we would call mainstream or traditional media, and you're not in print, you're not over the air on radio or broadcast. You are serving people directly through social media, through podcasts and audio on their phone in Spanish language. And furthermore, the newsroom consists not of Columbia journalism graduates or people that worked at WHYY, but cosmetologists and therapists. And it turns out that this is the way most people get their information, or through a church. Other means of informal word of mouth and social media, whenever we poll Philadelphians, that is the 2 sources that they cite first and foremost, because they're ubiquitous and because they trust them. One of the issues that plagues newspapers, traditional newspapers, and cable television is one of trust. So we can come back to that. Congratulations on what you've built. We'll come back to the Press Forward grant, which I think is a validation of that as well.
Thanks to the team.
Yeah. Jess, if you can explain what the Steinman Institute is and what you do, the structure briefly, that would be great. We'll come back in a kind of case study of a specific grant in a few minutes, so don't go there, but just set it up for us.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here. Thanks for having us. So the Steinman Institute is relatively new. We started in 2023 with a multi-year gift from the Steinman Foundation, private family foundation based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And as Jim said, the Steinman family had been the longtime owner for about 160 years of the local newspaper, which has been publishing for 230 years, still publishing 7 days a week, and still going strong. They really wanted to figure out how to sustain that investment that their family had tended to for so long. And so looking at the landscape in local journalism and willing to take risks and try new things, they, like Jim said, gifted the newspaper to the public media affiliate, WITF. And then their family foundation also made a multi-year gift to start the Steinman Institute to leverage philanthropy to support local news and information writ large in Lancaster and central Pennsylvania. And I'll say that the first part, like we've started, I've been here about 18 months. Our funding so far has really been about supporting WITF and LNP as that big partnership. And then
the newspaper.
LNP is the newspaper, the legacy newspaper, Lancaster newspapers. And then what we're also doing, we've become a Press Forward local chapter along with the Steinman Foundation. So we're Press Forward Central Pennsylvania. And we're also looking at creating more of a local news and information ecosystem in central Pennsylvania and leaning into that, really taking a lot of cues from what Lenfest has done of tending to a local news and information ecosystem, leveraging more funds, bringing more folks into that, both from a funding perspective and in a relationship building with other local news organizations of all sizes. So that's what we're up to right now.
Steinman and WITF and LNP are part of a national trend of public media acquiring or being gifted other media where the public media is relatively strong, like Chicago Public Media, WBEZ, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Those folks were given a gift of the Chicago Sun-Times recently so that the newspaper could begin to get funding from the public, not just sell advertising and sell subscriptions, but sell memberships and align itself much more with the needs of Chicagoans. And that was, I think, to some extent a model of the Lenfest Institute, which was a donation of a newspaper to a nonprofit, no public media involved, although we support public media. Do you think this, where do you think this goes from here? Do you think this is
That's a great question. I mean, we really talk about this as an experiment. We talk about Lancaster as a laboratory for trying to figure some of this stuff out. We're learning a lot, and I can say as it's relatively new still, there's a lot of lessons learned. I do think nonprofit news is a key piece of the ecosystem going forward and leveraging philanthropy, which is why we're all here talking about this, to support local news. I think we all know that the business model for local news is fundamentally broken. And so part of what we're trying to figure out collectively is how to reinvent the best parts of it and leverage additional sources of revenue to support it, but also grow audiences and reframe the value proposition of what local news is to local communities.
Thank you. Nina, tell us a little bit more about media impact funders and maybe zoom out a bit about how funders think about media, or since I suspect many in the room are not specifically journalists or media people, but involved with different forms of community and community groups, where does all that fit in the minds of funders?
Sure, thanks, Jim. And thanks, Sarah Glover, for inviting me. I don't know where she is in this room right now, but we worked together ages ago at the Philadelphia Daily News, so it's nice to be collaborating again in much different roles. And I also just want to clarify that MIF is not a grantee of Press Forward, and so my comments will be, a little more broad in scope, and I hope that they will be helpful. So as Jim mentioned, MIF is a national network of funders who support media and journalism in the public interest. And one of our primary roles at MIF is to convene conversations among funders to discuss their strategies and their approaches to supporting this work so that we can advance the field as a whole. And our job is to understand the why and the how. So why are funders supporting this work? and how are they doing it? I think we probably know a little bit more about the why collectively than the how. And so I can try to explain that a little bit, because there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to serving a community's information needs. And that work will look different from foundation to foundation. And so I always really appreciate having spaces like this to peel back the curtain on what funders do, because a lot of philanthropy is a mystery to the public. It's a mystery to me sometimes, and I've been working with funders for nearly a decade. And so with regard to the why, and I just want to mention this because I think it's important for the grant seekers in the room, as newsrooms have diminished in capacity or have closed down entirely, obviously that has left a void in coverage of the issues that foundations care about, whether it's education or health or the environment. These issues are receiving less independent scrutiny. And the reason that I'm sharing this, we know this, but the reason I'm sharing this is because I think it's really important, number one, to remember that there's case making happening on both sides of this equation. You all are making the case for grant support so that you can serve your community. But if you were to ask a funder how they were able to make the case internally to their boards for adding media grants to their portfolios, it's usually around these dynamics that I just mentioned, that the disappearance of coverage undermines the work that the foundation is trying to do. And I think not many grant seekers are really thinking about it in that context. I actually think this is probably a common misconception that media organizations have about philanthropy. Some funders have to do a lot of work internally before they can get those media grants out the door. And so I don't know if that's something that Jess could speak to, or any other funders in this room.
Is that true of community engagement or civic engagement or democracy-oriented funding as well, or is that unique to journalism?
I think so. Okay, here we go. I think it's important to acknowledge that the vast majority of foundations are not explicitly organized to support journalism. Most foundations are funding through their program areas, and so to add media to that portfolio, they have to do a lot of case-making work internally. And so if you're organized explicitly around a media portfolio, it's probably a lot easier to make that case, because that's how you're structured. So if you're a civic engagement funder, if you're a democracy funder, or a journalism funder, it's probably easier. Although there are a number of democracy funders who I would say have had to be educated around the importance of supporting the fourth estate.
Interesting. So a given funder might have K through 12 or arts and education, green space and environment, healthcare. These are the very big categories. And journalism or civic engagement in general is a kind of horizontal. Those are the verticals. And appealing to them in a way that makes sense to them, where they have an existing pool of capital. That's your advice as well as your observation, right?
Yes. Also, I have to hold myself differently. Here? Okay. I lost my train of thought. I was going to add one more thing. So because of the way that funders are kind of organized around this work, like there aren't hundreds of media program officers running around. And so one thing that I think is important to know is there are a lot of funders who want to support media and journalism, outside of a dedicated media portfolio. And one thing that they end up doing is supporting infrastructure organizations, because those organizations, are closer to the newsrooms. They're closer to the work of newsrooms. And so one piece of advice that I have for grantees is to make sure you're connected with groups like INN and Lion and Tiny News Collective, or any kind of journalism support organization that kind of coincides with the work that you're doing?
Good advice. I think we've committed to spend at least half our time on with audience involvement, and we have about 5 minutes to keep that promise. So, Emma, how did you get $100,000 out of Press Forward in a national contest that involved, I think, 500 applications, 100 winners? I want to talk about a kind of case study for each of you. Yours is the most tangible and the most recent.
Thank you, Jim. Well, first, thanks to Press Forward, PJC, Every Voice, Every Vote, Independence Public Media Foundation, because we can show our work in order to apply for Press Forward. Right?
So track record.
Yeah.
You have a track record that you can demonstrate you're not brand new at this.
Exactly. Also, following Nina, we are part of Lion, Tiny News Collective, ONA, INN. You guys have a lot of acronyms. Okay. It's not easy.
These are broadly referred to as journalism support organizations. They help you figure out membership or your technology or how to leverage matching funds or Newsmatch or other existing infrastructures so that you can focus on doing what you do best, which is creating great content and engaging audience.
They have taught us a lot of things, and they have helped us to move from being a child to being a teenager. And also PJC have helped us to do some collaborative work, which help us to extend the content that we have that has probably a special angle that big media not necessarily have. So we can share that. But I think one of the reasons, so that is one reason, and the other one is that I think we have been creative not only in the way that we spread or build information, content, but also we are a diverse team. We have all kind of colors, bilingual, bicultural, and that also I think helps. And I think the third ingredient is that we write the grant proposals from the heart. I mean, we are what we are, right? We don't pretend to seem white to write in that structure. We are more spontaneous, very Latinos, very from the heart, and very showing our passion. And I think that's also important we don't have an expert to write our grant proposal, but yeah.
As one who both writes and reads grants, you can sense the passion and you can sense the heart sometimes, and sometimes it just feels like a professionally written grant, which is great, but it's sort of all science and no art, and you really leaned into that, and that's personally and professionally, and I think that's when there's 500 grants being read, and you're one of the 100. That's something that stood out, and your track record. So congratulations.
Thank you, Jen. And I would like that. Can you imagine a person reading all those grants, like 150 grants? So it's good to have something refreshing, right? Oops, okay, this is good.
Exactly, and keeping it short. That's my main advice. Short and sweet. Jess, one grant that sort of illustrates the larger points that we've been driving at.
Sure, yeah. By our charter, we need to fund in 5 areas: journalism, supporting professional development of journalists, innovation, civic engagement, civic education. So a couple ideas in that. In the innovation bucket, we funded a data desk, so data journalism at LNP, to go deeper into understanding local campaign finance in Pennsylvania, wonky, and you all know this, like getting that kind of record means going into the county courthouse, pulling paper files, looking through them, putting pieces together. So this was about supporting a team of journalists to it's a second phase of a project where they had already scanned in a lot of paper records, and now they're really analyzing it to do better journalism about it and make sure that this is about keeping government accountable, seeing patterns in money in politics, and how they can serve the community better from that perspective of what it means to be an engaged and informed citizen and understanding your local government. So that's one investment. And I could also mention another is about civic education, information, and media literacy. So we supported WITF, which had a long history, like WHYY, of PBS Kids and working in education. So supporting teacher professional development to teach information literacy. It's a space that teachers are really interested in, feel under-equipped to teach it, feel like it's a politicized environment. So it's about how to support teachers to build up their skill sets to better teach their students. And I think the Constitution Center was talking about this in the earlier panel today. It's so important for our young people to understand information literacy, not just young people, all of us, to understand information and media literacy to better be consumers of information and be better citizens.
Those are great examples. Curious, did the grantee apply to you, or did you say, this is what we were set up to do? We were put on earth to do the following, please apply for it.
Those were their ideas.
Got it. It usually works best that way when you go to execute it. So you are narrow geographically compared with like MacArthur or Ford or the Knight Foundation, obviously, who are national, in some cases global, but you go very deep. You start with childhood education and media literacy on through campaign finance reform, and your cross-media, meaning events, newspapers, public radio, and television.
Yeah, so, hyper-local.
Right. And in kind of philanthropy terms, this is a place-based foundation, like William Penn, which focuses on Pennsylvania and the Delaware watershed and Philadelphia, versus a topical foundation like Robert Wood Johnson, which is focused on healthcare. Quick question for Nina, and then we'll open it up. An example, maybe Robert Wood Johnson, of someone that was convinced themselves that to do what they were put on earth to do, help with health policy, for example, that media and journalism were a key part of that. Who's a kind of exemplar of that, and how did it happen? Someone got to them to, internally or externally, make the case for journalism, even though their charter was something specifically vertical, like healthcare.
I think one of the best examples of that comes from our board chair's foundation, the Joyce Foundation, which had several issue areas.
They're Chicago-based?
Chicago-based Joyce Foundation.
Great Lakes
They serve the Great Lakes region, yeah. They started funding media through their various portfolios. They do gun violence prevention. They do criminal justice and other issue areas. And they basically figured out that, what I said earlier about how lack of coverage on the issues that they cared about was undermining what they were trying to do. And they eventually led to creating a media portfolio. And I think that's one of the most compelling examples that we have, is that they actually changed their entire strategy when they realized how important it was to have journalists interrogating the ideas that they were seeking coverage about. And
presumably they do that at arm's length, so they're not dictating the coverage.
Of course, absolutely. You would be tainting your investment if you were putting your thumb on the scale in this work specifically. That's why journalism philanthropy is so unique in this regard. You have to maintain strict editorial firewalls.
A couple of questions for all of you, and then please, questions, thoughts. kind of no holds barred. I think Bill Marazzo asked how many are from Philadelphia, proper Philadelphia city. So I know we're live streaming, and maybe if anyone is out there, they can't see the audience. That's at least half, I think. How about the surrounding 5 counties? Maybe another 10, 15%. Delaware? Yeah, pretty good. South Jersey and elsewhere in the country. 2. Where from? I'm curious. That's where I grew up. So regional but diverse group. How many are in some form of media or community media or journalism or something of that nature? That's a good half. And those who are not, how many are in community organizations or community and civic engagement of some kind? That's basically everybody else. And finally, we're talking about funding. All these organizations presumably are funded one way or another. How many are involved kind of day to day in that funding process? Which is a way of saying, is this interesting to you? Is it relevant? That's probably a third. And last, this is Nina's question, I think. How many have given to public radio, public television personally, or become a member of a nonprofit news organization? And not surprising, but that's a very high percentage. It's maybe 60, 70%. Would that be kind of nationwide? What would you like to talk about? We have a good 25 minutes. We have a microphone running around over here. Let's do 1, 2, 3. And as Bill suggested, just tell us who you are and then how we can help.
Oh, wow. I'm back. All right. Hi, I'm Masara Makati, a longtime local reporter and working in journalism support organizations as well to support newsrooms and strengthening their relationships with communities of color. That being said, a lot of community engagement initiatives are, and in my opinion, should be focused on repairing relationships with communities of color. We are in a perilous political environment right now when it comes to these initiatives and supporting these initiatives. I'm wondering if you guys can provide some insight on how the funding scene is responding to still meeting the needs of communities that we're supposed to serve as newsrooms, but also, the perilous moment that we're in right now. I've been hearing about a slowdown in funding. I've been hearing about a lot of fear. And I'd love to just have some candid conversation and transparency about what those conversations are looking like in the philanthropy scene right now.
Lissara, where did you work as a community journalist?
I've been all over Albany, Houston. My last stop was the Philly Inquirer. I was on the communities and engagement desk, but I switched to journalism support last year.
Got it. Thank you. It's a really great question. I'd love anyone to volunteer an answer. As you think about it, I spoke with a group called the LMA, the Local Media Association, which tends to be mid-sized for-profit newspapers. They have deep membership penetration in Black legacy media, Hispanic media, and Asian language media, and some local television, some startups, but mainly legacy. And they have created a couple of really innovative programs, one called Word in Black, another one, I can't remember the exact name, but it's like Media Out for LGBTQ. And they were asking, how do we continue to do all of that, and which they're passionate about and their members are passionate about, and they've been successful at in this funding environment. And their conclusion was that they want to continue to stand up, they want to continue to fund these things, and they think their funders, like MacArthur or Google or Microsoft or the Ford Foundation, are with them, but they want to be more subtle about it, and they want to be more, they want to change some of the language and some of how they present publicly. And it was an interesting conversation because their intent and their desire, and they think their funders' appetites remain the same, but they want to show up differently and get the word DEI off of, or trans off of their website to keep out of trouble. So it was an interesting observation, but the sense was that their hearts were in the right place, and they were trying to navigate a challenging time. Other thoughts?
I think, candidly, I think that the criticism right now about philanthropy being slow to respond is fair. In the conversations that we're having with our funders, we've kind of started convening a series of emergency calls with funders to talk about how to support newsrooms and media organizations in this moment, because media organizations, if the challenges that they were facing weren't enough, now they have to field, audit requests where they might have to give up sensitive information, or they have to worry about safety and security issues here in the U.S., which is something that the global media landscape has been dealing with forever. But now those issues are sort of bleeding into the U.S. And so I think in taking the pulse of funders as regularly as we do, funders are very concerned, but they're still trying to figure out what to do, what levers to pull. And I think we're slowly seeing some funders coming out and increasing their payouts, as much as 30%, like the Skoll Foundation. And I think that we'll continue to see more of that. But I would say your question is a fair question, and it continues. It needs to be asked regularly. But I think that, I don't know if you follow the Center for Effective Philanthropy at all, but they're doing a lot of
at Penn, University of Pennsylvania. Or?
No. This is they're a standalone organization. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, that's my boss, Vince Staley. If you look at the research that they're conducting, they're kind of regularly taking pulse checks of nonprofits, and they're all kind of saying writ large, like, philanthropy, we need you to step up, and it's just been a little slow.
I think Jasenia had a question. Is that right? And then this gentleman down here.
Thank you, Jim. I must say, for me, it's an honor to see Emma Restrepo in this position, because as a community and engagement journalist myself, who arrived in Philadelphia 7 years ago to cover Latinos for the Philadelphia Inquirer, it has been her work and the work of Leticia Roa Nixon, Edgar Ramirez, and other community journalists here in the city that had paved the way for me to be able to do my work. So I really appreciate your leadership.
Thank you, Jasenia.
Thank you all. I am Yesenia de Moya Correa. As mentioned, a community and engagement journalist. I dedicate myself to Latino communities in general. Right now, I am the director of the Latino Media Initiative at the Center for Community Media in New York City. And I appreciate you all for this talk. Specifically, I'm interested in looking at the criterias that funders use to be able to measure the impact that journalists and their work has in their communities. We know, because of previous conversations that we've had with other funders, about certain limitations when it comes to the perspectives of how to measure the impact that journalists can have in their communities. And I would love to hear from Ms. Sachdev and from Ms. King, specifically in the current context. Have there been any changes in the ways that your funding is being provided and measured within the folks that you have granted certain opportunities? And I would love to hear from Ms. Restrepo, in particular with Press Forward, what do you look forward to presenting to them, and how are they looking forward to measuring your impact and the work that you look forward to do?
I could start. Great questions. We're so new that I don't feel like I can have a lot of deltas about changes over time. But some things that we look for, and a lot of what we're talking about, we're looking at the business model and also the reach and the impact in the community of what local news and information can provide. So that's about, some of it is business metrics and reach and all that. But there this whole other area about building trust and relationships that I'd say we're just starting to scratch the surface on. And one thing I'm really excited about is a project that we're working on, just starting with the Alliance for Trust in News that's doing some cool stuff. I know that they have a couple projects that they're working on measuring in practice with other newsrooms, so I can at least point to those, like the Texas Tribune doing some creative work of engaging with underserved audiences and groups that have low trust in media, and tracking how different kinds of engagements with newsrooms directly can increase trust. And I think that's a really exciting area that we're interested in deploying with some of our investments to see how can you really move the needle. Because, I mean, I think we can all be honest, when we talk about the broken business model and then the fact that we don't, in so many communities, and we're in Lancaster, it's a much more conservative market, it's there you see just like a polarization happening and distrust of media on political lines, on geographical lines, and that we don't have a shared sense of place anymore. We don't even believe the same facts. And so what we need to do to try to build more trust in media and find good ways of measuring that and what works the best is of utmost importance and urgency.
Well, I can go. And before that, to echo the previous question, yes, it's very sad and disappointed to see that the Enquirer aborted the community desk, a little incoherent. We are thinking of showing how we are getting more mature with the content that we produce. We are using the funds to have journalist Gareth Fadley and also an editor-in-chief, Christopher Malo, because that led us to produce articles, something that we haven't done before, so we can act more as a more mature media, like Metro Philadelphia or still local. And also we want to increase the frequency that we publish articles. We are doing bilingual, English and in Spanish, and also it depends if we want to tell this to the American community, what is happening in our community, we use English because we already know some things that are happening, so we are kind of open the dialogue and tell our story. And vice versa, we use Spanish to bring some of the topics, services, goals that we have with the Latino community in their connection to the city. We are also promised to, one of the things that we want to do connected with this administration is to show more the second generation Latinos, because Latinos have been here for centuries. So that idea of spelling Latinos or killing Spanish, or, it doesn't sound normal. So we think that one way to show that that is impossible is to bring the voices of second and third generation. Actually, Garrett is third generation Latino, and I think that's great. And how we connect that information with other ways to produce information, which is social media, how we connect articles with social media. So that is the work that we want to show Press Forward once we finish this year.
One of the great things about social media, there are downsides, but it is highly measurable. The reason it's become such a powerful advertising medium is that you can see that Dos Puntos has reached 500,000 people on Instagram in the last hour, and it's very, very trackable. And those metrics are of interest to funders. Nina, briefly, if you will, and then we'll get more questions.
Sure. So measuring the impact of journalism is tricky. Measuring the impact of media in general is tricky. This is long game work. This is work. Journalism needs multi-year, oftentimes unrestricted funding to keep these newsrooms alive and kicking, so to speak. And funders are trying to figure out how to measure the impact while fulfilling their internal programmatic objectives. And it's a work in progress. But I do think that we've seen a shift over the last few years where we're kind of getting away from more of the vanity metrics, like clicks, and moving more toward, are people talking about the issue in the community more? And so there are a lot of impact conversations about community listening. But to answer your question about impact in this context, sometimes impact is just keeping the lights on and protecting the journalists and allowing them to do their work safely. And that can be an impact metric.
What does it say? 10 minutes. Oh. That was an editorial comment because you're a managing editor here, right? Thank you. There's a kind of construct in tracking funding about outputs versus outcomes, and output is, let's take every voice, every vote. We know that there were 600 articles created by 25 news organizations over the course of 2 years. We know that we had a major piece of research that was completed by 1,500 Philadelphians that said that 89% of the city felt the city was moving in the wrong direction. We know that we produced voter guides in 13 different languages. The outcome is sort of, so what did that produce? And that's more qualitative. And one of the most powerful pieces qualitatively was Sherelle Parker saying, had it not been for your 40 public events, and she attended all of them, I would never have been able to communicate to all the communities that I care about and care about me, and this was meaningfully influential in my getting elected, versus the big advertising budgets that several of the self-funded advertising budgets that several of the other candidates had. So one is an output and the other is an outcome, and I've been reminded frequently, don't confuse the two. Sir, you had a question.
It's more of a comment question.
Yeah, here you go.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity.
And comments are great too.
I am Calvin Williams, and I am a 3/4 of a century lived experience, conscious lived experience Philadelphian. Third generation of activists, community activists, and from where we lived, in our community, which we were confined to, news started, the journalism started from Miss Mary's porch, Miss Newsy, Miss Mary's porch. That's my source. And so my question is in the climate today and how things are getting funded, a lot of the people that I'm associated with are funded through your organizations. And if the climate now is against diversity and all those kind of things coming from different news media outlets and all, how best for my neighbors and all to request grants and getting all those things when they always identify themselves as African American, Latino, Black community, and all of those things, diversity, we want to do this, we want to do that, when that could be a buzzword to throw their applications into the garbage pail under the climate today. So how well and how can they find a way to be able to get these funds and everything and be inclusive in those kinds of things in this kind of an environment. And I would just add that, again, lived experience. Johnny, I think it was at the last panel session, the young fellow at the end hit it on the nail at the very end. You have to rely on lived experience and elders that know these things. We are right now doing the same things over and over and over again. I say around long enough to see this process. And so you have to find time to find the elders in the communities, news medias, every outlet, and speak with them to help give you direction because they know what works.
Remind me your first name?
Calvin.
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 Thank you, sir. Thank you for both the advice and the question. And Sean, if I could, Sean Mooring, give you, like a 2-minute warning. I don't think this environment has changed our resolve or our funding plans at all. If anything, kind of the opposite. So and the focus on trusted messengers and other sources of wisdom that Calvin has been talking about. So maybe you can speak to that in a moment as we get close to time and others start out. This is probably, you're probably best positioned to answer the question of how an anti-DEI, I think it's safe to say, federal government or federal executive impacts how you approach the market, if at all.
Yeah, we had made some decisions with the editorial content. Yes. That, for instance, the Latina journalist, she's a student. We supposedly think that she will be the person to show the product, but we decided that it is better if she doesn't do it because we can have some kind of consequences for the platform. Right. We had to go back like 5 steps with a poster newspaper that we were designing how to Latinas navigate the education system, because we had to change a lot of things that we wrote on the poster newspaper. So we are in a very difficult time. We don't know as a platform what is going to happen. I love that question of is going to be fun, money or not to help us, because we wouldn't be able to do all this work. It is not because of the money that we get. And we know that there are some lawyers that help Latino communities that probably they will be persecuted for the work that they are doing. I mean, the narrative is totally changed. So how we can show something that a topic, an issue that we consider important and the community, let's say the white Philadelphia community had to know it, if we can't really show that. So what are we going to build to try to put those stories there, still doing it without being in trouble?
So you're trying to work smarter but not change your mission in any way?
No, we still faithful to our mission, but we have to be very strategical and really create something new every time, because we don't know.
We just got the 3-minute warning and want to stick with time. Sean, just quick thoughts about, as a kind of Philadelphia funder, and you have your ear to the ground with other funders. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so yeah, as we think about it, I think we haven't seen in my ecosystem funding that I've been doing with our partners a large reaction yet, but I think folks are positioning themselves for what may come. We've seen the administration kind of go after national funders and being kind of punishing for people who've been truth-saying in that moment. But, we did do, with some of our partners, funding partners, an emergency grant to Impacto, for instance, to, put out information for their constituents and really looking at doing it across Pennsylvania for immigrants that may need to seek protection or how to respond when ICE comes knocking at the door. So, we also have seen where some of our support of ethnic, communities and papers in the city, again, are just looking at how do they prepare themselves for what may come. It hasn't gotten to the point as of yet where we're seeing a lot of reaction to what's happening in local communities, but again, just watching what's happening across, the gamut across the country and seeing how it's impacting potentially impacting public media. And so our, affiliates like WHYY across the country, what's going to happen as, funding becomes threatened and all of that. So I think from my vantage point in terms of looking at how we're funding locally, it's really about preparing and making sure that we're aware and trying to help position our grantees as best we can to be thoughtful about, how they're generating revenue and how they can sustain themselves and, be protected in this environment.
We have the 1 minute warning, and I apologize for anyone who had thoughts to share. The gentleman in the back, and we're happy to chat off stage. We are in the auditorium of a public media station. Public media stations begin with the word public, and this form of media is specifically threatened right now. There have been congressional hearings about it. There is an investigation by the FCC into underwriting and sponsorship, which is, I think, unassailable moral and probably legal form of funding for public media. The CPB, which is the government entity that funds public media, is, I think, 6 or 7% of WHYY's revenue, which is meaningful. That is a low percentage nationally. The more rural and the less urban and the less locally supported these stations are, and many of them are in red states, the higher that percentage is, and it can be as much as 50%. So I wanted to close with the notion that one of the things we can all do is support public media like WHYY, specifically WHYY, since they are our hosts. And with that, thank you, Sarah Glover.
Thank you to the panelists. Again, Jim Friedlich, Executive Director and CEO of the Lenfest Institute for Journalism, Nina Sachdev, Communications Director, Media Impact Funders, Jess King, Executive Director of the Steinman Institute, and Emma Restrepo, one of the esteemed Philadelphia area journalists of Two Puntos platform. We're so grateful for your discourse today and expanding this discussion around civic news. And again, note that this convening would not be possible without the support of our partners, and that includes Every Voice and Every Vote, which is a significant myriad of around 70 plus organizations and newsrooms who've come together under the wonderful support of multiple area foundations and donors, some of which are Lenfest, Wincoat, William Penn, a very long list. Please Google Every Voice, Every Vote to learn more about that. Also WHYY News, and our Bridging Blocks program, and our NICE program. You can learn more about those on our website. With that, we're going to sunset this panel discussion. We'll have a lot more for the rest of the day and tomorrow. Thank you so much. And just a housekeeping note, that ends the live stream if you wondered why I kept repeating this.